Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Science. She was Assistant Professor, Kuwait University, Kuwait. She worked as consultant editor for Thaqafa Al-Alamiya, National Council for Culture, Arts and Letters, Kuwait. She was manager, Office of International Program, KFAS, Kuwait. She was also Directorate of International Relations and Knowledge Management, KFAS, Kuwait. Dr. Albedah, please.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, distinguished presenters and organizers of this meeting, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I wish to extend the sincere greetings from Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Science to the organizers and attendees of this conference. I would also like to extend my gratitude for His Highness Prince Al Hassan for the dose of philosophy injected into the conversation this morning. This is always a welcome entry point for such layered and complex matters. Please allow me to use this as a prelude to my humble contribution to this conversation. But also, I would like to join His Royal Highness in remembering the passing of Professor Muhammad Fakhrizadeh in Iran, a tragic loss for all of us. May his soul rest in peace. My talk today is titled STI Development, the Centrality of General Education. It draws on the work of Alessandra Colicius, Simone Lamarino et al., and the known work of the STI indicators in OECD and World Bank and United Institutions. I will start from the premise that economic growth and sustainability rests on a keen understanding of the structural, legislative, and political economy of any region. Ironically, most policymakers and decision makers in academic institutions in our part of the world borrow indicators of STI development from contexts that are at odds with our regional context, such as overall R&D expenditure, specialized peer-reviewed publications, patent applications and licensing, maturity of integration between academia and industry, et cetera, et cetera. While these indicators may track the development of STI in a mature industrial context, they may provide a misleading reading of our developing economies and the direction in which they need to move. This is not to say that they are false for this context, but they are insufficient and typically need to be qualified with a deeper, more contextualized set of indicators. This paper focuses on the centrality of general education setup, competencies, outcomes as the baseline for STI evolution in a developing economy. It sheds light on the value of critical thinking, problem solving, and creative thinking for the evolution of STI in opposition to the traditional focus on content-driven curricula. Allow me to take you through a quick timeline of the current indicators of STI, which have been developed in mature industrial world and then appropriated for the developing world. I will show that challenges that faced the utilization of these indicators in the countries for which they have been developed, then propose the development of a context-dependent indicator for Islamic countries, focused on the context of K-12 education. The STI indicators developed in the early 60s with the Frascati manual, as everybody knows. This produced the most celebrated framework for the assessment of STI development per R&D intensity, which is expenditure on R&D as a percentage of gross domestic product. The main shortcoming of this indicator is its inability to look systematically at the multifactorial process that enables STI environment and output. It assumes that science structure is stable and it does not change over time. In the mid-1990s, when Blue Sky Indicators project was launched by OECD, a shift from a linear model in which innovation is fed by R&D solely, towards a systemic theory of innovation where many different types of knowledge flows are identified. In the 1996, the set of indicators that were further developed were to improve the understanding of mobility of human sources, assess the economic value of innovation through use of patent statistics, trace the activities and network of science system through bibliometrics, look in depth at the innovative activity of few select service activities, study the innovation process at a firm level, particularly for small firms, measure the internationalization of the science and technology activities through use of data on the activities of M&Es and patent data. And finally, the construction of specific science and technology policies, such as the generosity of R&D tax credits. However, Collegium notices that most of the important work that has been done on tracking the SDIs in the 90s comes from outside of the indicator groups or the indicator group work. And this comes from, in the context of Europe, information society statistics, multinational enterprise statistics, education statistics, specifically the education attainment database, which looks at PISA as a survey of attainment, and productivity estimates. In the new millennium, new trends have posed themselves, necessitated the introduction of forward-looking indicators. So until the end of the 90s, the indicators have been retrospective ones. So we see what has happened, but it does not help us to look forward to project, because they assume that the system is, that the future will, it's an inductive kind of system. It assumes the future resembles the past and the structures are the same. With the new millennium, there were shifts in the location of comparative advantage for the production of manufactured goods and services. There were massive demographic changes that would impact the appropriation and uptake of technology, especially in the increase in the age gap in Europe. There was a major technological shift with the tension of rapid increase for the demand of energy and the increased worry about global warming, which necessitated looking at decarbonization of oil extraction and greenifying the oil. And 4 is the need to understand the changing relation between science and innovation in particular. And under that, they looked at science innovation interface. And so what is the relation between industry science linkages and interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary research? Second is the innovation has increasingly become collective endeavor. So we have the cluster of innovation a la Silicon Valley and what have you, where different components of the cluster would have different contributions to innovation. The location where the value of innovation is created and captured has changed with the growing importance of user-centered innovation, globalization from another side. But 4th, and this is where I want to focus my attention, is the human resources and science and technology at the heart of innovation process. And this is the part that we continuously overlook or underestimate in our part of the world, or we want to capture it at a much later stage, which is the state of R&D rather than education. So in Europe and Northern America, the shift in the millennium was a demand for talent, increased demand on talent made it cross-border. So people were mobile and the demand for them was not concentrated in one area. Universities have become the main gateways for talent at large industrial countries. And so when we look at the inclusiveness of the R&D population or the diversity of R&D population in industrial countries, this happens because of the fact that these countries have these universities that can accommodate those numbers of scientists, of young scientists, aspiring scientists to come in. Number 3, the migration of highly skilled talent and the mindset has shifted from the concept of brain drain to brain circulation. And this is, again, done from the perspective of highly industrialized countries because the globalization has integrated the value chains in such a way as the circulation of brains really benefits everybody. That does not apply to our part of the world. As a focus of evaluation, this point cannot be emphasized enough in the case of Islamic countries or most Islamic countries. The focus on human capital landscaping and development is a key factor in determining the future of SDI and the determination of the SDI indicators for our part of the world. In their study, Simona Lamoreno and her colleagues refer to the centrality of human capital. They say that without building the human capital pillars, low levels of private sector R&D are bound to persist and even remain economically justifiable, as it makes little sense for private sector to invest in long-term risky activities without the necessary inputs and expected outcomes. They further say, even the efforts to increase R&D by simply investing in public sector R&D without the adequate institutions, without the adequate skills and frameworks, risks to turn into money waste. And this is a great lesson that we need to look at carefully, because the increase of R&D, just ticking the box to keep up with the international indicators, may not exactly be the best investment for our part of the world. So what do we need to monitor in order to guarantee this inflow of relevant skills? Where should our investment in human capital focus? The UNICEF, looking at our parts of the world the way they do, tells us that there is a recognized poor quality of education, and there is a recognized mismatch between skills and labor markets. We also are the custodians of the largest human crisis and displacement in the world, with all the challenges that these pose for the future of our collective access to human knowledge and to our contribution to it. Foregoing that the bar is set so low for quality education because it is set at the base level of numeracy and literacy rather than excellence. It seems that looking at R&D intensity still in the absence of clear understanding of the formation or the molding of human capital in our part of the world would be counterproductive to the evolution of STI and to finding our voice in a fast-paced world. Many of our countries turned their attention to digital skilling, mostly from the perspective of consumers of technology. But it is wrong to think about digital skilling in the absence of logical thinking or the ability to pass judgment on epistemic value of information or the communication skills through which this knowledge can be articulated and transferred. To keep an eye on the human capital, it is not sufficient to look at gross education outputs, which is what most of the international institutions do. So when they look at attainment level, relevant placement, mobility, interaction in the innovation system, using alien systemic metrics, it does not really help us so much. This would likely continue to confirm that what we already know. It is not likely to inflict any change, but the amplification of our sense of disappointment and helplessness. Our approach should rather look at a little below the surface, at critical thinking, problem solving, and creative thinking for the evolution of STI in opposition to a traditional focus on content-driven curricula. This marks a systematic shift in K-12 and higher education in terms of curriculum, approach, teacher training, and targeted competencies. Some suggested indicators would be the spend on curriculum reform rather than spend per capita, which brushes under the carpet the fact that with which we need to grapple. Number two, we should look carefully at teacher credentialing and professional development, how local languages and cultures can be preserved and nudged to accept the knowledge which the youth typically learn in an alien context and alien knowledge. We have this issue of the English-Arabic, for example, in Arabic-speaking world, where our kids learn it in English and they're unable to articulate it in Arabic at all. We should look at wholesale system reforms in the structure and the governance of education to measure whether we are enabling instruction, free thought, and moral accountability, because these are the pillars of creating the knowers of the future. We should look at the value of education system, the values of the education system, and what type of human being it aspires to mold, because these are issues that we have continued to overcome and oversee. If the inflow of skilled knowledge owners does not provide the market with the needed level of exposure, skill, identity, cultivation, and the ability to work in a global market, neither our place in the world nor our voice in it would ever materialize. Thank you.
Dr. Amina, for this very good talk. We can entertain some questions.
Can I ask one question, please?
Dr. Azhar, please.
Yes, my question is very simple. What is the technological landscape of Kuwait at present? What is the technological landscape of Kuwait at present?
So we have conducted a couple of studies. One of them looks at the innovation ecosystem, and the other, actually three, it's a three-dimensional way. One looks at the structural impediments for growth in the economy of a rentier state, and the third looks at education. And the conclusion of these is that if we continue just looking at international indices, nothing will happen, because as a rentier state, there is this structural impediment to the private sector's jumping into R&D, which is a high stakes game for the private sector. It doesn't need to do it unless you provide the ecosystem that allows it to take on this risk. And one of the most important components of this ecosystem is the presence of a skilled human capital that is able to take this on. Otherwise, it is very difficult for us to convince, even if we provide vouchers, which KFAS does for certain industries in the private sector. Even if you provide monetary incentives for the private sector to take on R&D, they are likely to resist it or take on the consumer bit of the production line.
Comment, please.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Rida.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Amani, thank you so much. You really triggered many points, which really we have to think deeply on those points. What we see these days in most of our world, we are running at different universities and research institutions where people are running on the quality assurance, and we are just going for the ranking behind the QS, we are going behind Shanghai, we're going behind all of those things. But actually, we are doing nothing in the assessment of the quality of research in our region. And I think we have to go and assess the quality of the research, to which extent the research is building capacity, to which extent the research is empowering women in research, in science, in technology, in innovation. So I think we have to work on new strategy in our region to consider the assessment of the quality of the research in more essence than just looking after the academia and just getting the ranking. Well, I'm getting 3 stars or 4 stars. I'm getting that score and that score at this academic institutions, rather than looking at the quality of the research and to which extent we are serving our goals in what the research we are doing. Actually, we are paying a lot of money. If you go across the region, we are paying a lot of money. But what are the outcomes of that expenditure on research? Sometimes we can say, well, it's a little, or sometimes it's none or nothing. So I would appreciate really if we can come out of a recommendation out of the conference, if we go and assess the quality of the research in our region. Thank you so much.
Thank you. May I comment on this? I think you're right. There is an issue of assessing not the quality, but perhaps the quality can be done by doing bibliometric studies and seeing what kinds of Q level journals that people are publishing in, and that's kind of easy to do. But if we want to assess the social return or the economic return on the research intensity in our part of the world, that's going to be very difficult, because it is happening outside of an ecosystem that can absorb the outcomes of this research. And we do have indicators to tell us that, for the most part, this is of course not across the board in the Islamic world, but more so concentrated in the Middle East. The absorptive capacity of the ecosystem is very low, and the reason is that the university is, entirely independent and cut off from the rest of the economy. And to create that link, the area that we need to focus on, especially with the youth bulge that we have in the Middle East, is K-12 education, because unless you reform the study, you reform the molding of the human being, it is entirely impossible for us to assume that most of these kids will turn to science. We have witnessed in the literature in Europe a turn away from scientific specialization. And for that reason, there was a big encouragement for women's enrollment in science. And this is how it happened. It was not a gender equality kind of call. It was a really trying to circulate more people into the sciences, because the traditional boys were not going into these specializations anymore. to give you a story about how we just run after whatever international indices without thinking, in Kuwait, 70% of the science and engineering STEM fields are occupied by women students. Okay. We have recently held, there was a recently held conference about the trying to motivate women to go into STEM fields in Kuwait. And it doesn't get any more bewildering than that, because for sure, we have to look at why the boys are not getting better education and getting into STEM. But because we're following international trends and not looking at our cultural context, we are kind of always doing the wrong kind of intervention, or looking at the wrong kind of indicator.
Yeah, in this regard, I would like to make a comment. As a matter of fact, we at the IAS are planning to conduct a training program regarding assessing the research and development in the plans of society development and so on. That will be taking place sometime in the middle of January.
There is a center at AUB that has taken on an indicator for the social return on research, and they have last year, but at the end of the year and COVID took over, they put together a website where they would crowdsource their evaluations. So maybe this is something to look at.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, let's